We couldn't save our 15-year marriage because my wife friend-zoned me and wants a platonic companionship. My wife, 35F, and I, 35M, have been married for 15 years. And we've been together for 20 years. We have 2 kids, 12 and 14, who we absolutely adore and work tirelessly to provide the best possible life for. For the past 3 years, things have been somewhat bumpy. I understand that our kids are at an age where they require a ton of our attention and resources with school, band, club sports, and other extracurriculars. And I'm aware of the physical and emotional toll that can have on marriages. However, for these past 3 years, my wife and I have had very little intimacy and very little sex. And we've been trying very hard to work on that aspect of our relationship. This past year has been the most difficult, and by far the darkest year in our marriage. We didn't talk very much. We essentially became roommates, co-parenting our kids under the same roof. It was very depressing and very demoralizing. It was to the point where we began contemplating divorce. And it became very dark and gloomy in the household because of that. We began seeking help with both individualized therapy and couples therapy, and it seems to have helped some. Little by little, we started to get along and started to have deeper conversations about what our marriage looks like and what we would love for it to look like. This is where it gets tough. As time passed, my wife started to tell me she no longer was in love with me and that she only saw me as a best friend, that she only loved me in a very platonic way. And this was one of the main reasons she didn't have any desire for intimacy, and let alone sex. This was very shocking to me, and quite frankly, I was devastated. I became angry and depressed. And I couldn't fathom the thought that I was no longer wanted or desired by the person I felt completely in love with. Things began to deteriorate again, and not long after, we were back to square one. I sat down with her one afternoon and had a heart-to-heart, and began to ask questions about where the root of this problem lies, and her answer was, "I don't know. And that I have built up resentment towards you, but I don't know where it stems from." As you can imagine, this provides very little to no insight into how to approach this. I'm puzzled. I'm frustrated, and I do not know what to do at this point. Currently, we've arrived at a place where she says that she has no sex drive and no desire for intimacy or connection. She says that all she wants is simply companionship, which basically means our co-parenting roommate dynamic. I asked her what I could possibly do or what is it about me that is so unattractive or undesirable, and her response is always, "I don't know." She stated that she does love me, but it's not the same. That she has been feeling disconnected for years, and that our marriage just takes up too much work. Her focus is only the children for now. And that my co-parenting contributions are meaningful to her in our home. I'm at a loss, and I'm mainly venting about my frustration. It's tough to realize that the person you love has no feelings for you. I feel like at this point I'm only here to contribute financially and as a parent. I feel like what she means with companionship is that she's comfortable with the convenience of having a good father for our kids and my financial contribution to the household. In regard to intimacy and or sex, she basically told me that it's not something she's interested in or wants at this time. She mentioned that the only way to get to a point for any of that is to be intoxicated, which is incredibly awful and very wrong. I told her I do not think forcing herself to have sex or be intimate by drinking or smoking is good, and I declined to be a part of that, which, to my surprise, upset her and made her more distant. We both are extremely honest and transparent. We've never cheated on each other, and we are always free to look through each other's phones, emails, socials, etc., and we hardly ever do. I asked her if there was someone else, and she declined. Honestly, I believe her. We then peacefully went through each other's things, and as expected, it was clean. We've always been very forward, even with the hard topics, so I don't smell or feel any foul play or infidelity. Am I wrong for declining to only be intimate or have sex when she's intoxicated? I'm firm on my stance of not partaking in this only when I'm high or drunk sex because it doesn't sit well with me. I do not know how to help our situation, and I'm starting to become a bit anxious and desperate. We're both fairly young and healthy individuals and good-looking. We both have good-standing careers and are good parents. I'm just not sure how our lives could have driven us to this point. I'd love some outside perspective on this matter, and some insight on how to address something like this. It feels so awful to be unwanted and undesired by my own spouse. I hate it. My wife of 15 plus years is no longer in love with me and doesn't know why. And now says she can only have sex while intoxicated or I need to settle for a platonic, sexless marriage, and she doesn't know why that is, but it is what it is. I'm in need of insight or advice. Relevant comments missing reasons. Commenters looked at his history and found they were swingers. We did some swinging in the past that was fun for some time. We mutually decided to stop doing it. And we have established it's not the case when we were swinging. However, our marriage seemed to be in a good place. This is something we did disclose with our couple therapist, and made sure to include it to make sure we're not neglecting an obvious potential issue. I will say I did ask my wife if what she experienced during swinging is something that is affecting her view on our relationship, and she said it wasn't. Our swinging experience was always together. And it was very sex-driven, nothing really emotional or poly. Truth is, I have to believe her at her word. I have no reason to distrust her. To date, she's always been very forward and never afraid of dealing with things head-on, no matter how painful. If this is a consequence of swinging, this issue existed long before the lifestyle. I agree that swinging wasn't a solution in the end, never was meant to be. It was more of discovering or exploring if she felt any different. If that was the case, we agreed we would talk about it. And if we arrive at the conclusion that myself is the problem, and she has no problem with other men, we would part ways amicably. However, this wasn't the case. She didn't like sex or intimacy there either. She was very much in control of that whole swinging situation, and yes, I went along with it. What gives? It felt very organic, and it was her effort, if you will, to discover more and learn more. More about our current issue. I saw it as a means of learning if I'm the problem and was very much ready to accept that. It turns out it wasn't the case. 6 years of misery sound awful. I would very much hate that, OP. If this started when the swinging ended. Finally, a comment on the swinging topic with actual insight. You're absolutely right about the fact that the swinging experience had things change that will impact our marriage and lives forever. For example, the best thing swinging taught us, even above sexual exploration, was the level of transparent and open communication it requires. We would literally have mental orgasms having dialogue with such intentionality. We implemented that in all areas of our lives, including parenting with our children. She even agrees that we're thankful for that takeaway from our swinging. Honestly, I cannot stress it enough with people here. Yes, we explored swinging, however, it was actually a positive experience. When we decided to stop, it was because it felt natural and organic to just do so. In fact, we met with that couple who we met super well with the night before. We actually enjoyed the actual friendship and even spent time as vanilla friends, so it wasn't because of something negative. Wife mentioned that it certainly wasn't any better. And since she's not enjoying the sex, we both agreed there's no point to this. I agreed, and we moved on, and we're still friends with those people because it's great. All that said, I know more often than not swinging causes massive issues. However, this was something we explored in pursuit of a solution to an issue that was present way before. I think of it as taking a practical approach to trying to solve the problem. Update 1. I wanted to give you guys an update of how the therapy session with my wife went this week. Not sure if this is helpful or not, but I took many of the responses, SL comments, SL suggestions from my initial post, and put together some things I wanted to discuss with our couples therapist to help us navigate some of the core issues that may be affecting this situation. One of the main things that is the buzzword of this has been the term resentment. And it has been really eating me up inside knowing my wife keeps telling me she doesn't know why she's resentful, or doesn't know why this is affecting her emotionally, mentally. I brought this up with our therapist once again and resurfaced the conversation about being married for so long, 15 years, and being together since we were 14 years old. Our long history of growing up and how having children when she was 19 years old, me 20, significantly changed the trajectory of our lives. We experienced severe poverty and many hardships in the process, and we essentially had zero social life for the past 10 years because we were so busy raising babies, 2 kids now, ages 12 and 14. She followed up with tons of questions directly, mostly from my wife, about her feelings towards this, and 90% of the responses were very kid-focused. It definitely felt like she was afraid of saying yes. It sucked because she would feel guilt or shame because it would imply she regrets the kids. I mentioned this in the session, and the therapist encouraged her to look at this outside of the lens of being a mother and to try to view it a bit more selfishly and individually, and it was very eye-opening. My wife mentioned that she was very frustrated with the fact that we did miss out on many things in life. She also was very clear in saying, "I do not think I missed out on other partners or dating or partying, but I certainly lost all my friends." This was huge because one of the big pieces that has caused a strain in our lives is how siloed and isolated we've been, again, busy raising kids. I followed up by reminding her that it's important to have good friends and to make time for herself and her friendships. For the past 3+ years, we've had multiple conversations about friends and how it is important to have them in life. Especially when you have similar peers that can help in many areas of life that perhaps we have no experience navigating, and even simply for enjoyment. It has always been something my wife avoids, even though she's always been someone who needs that external stimuli. The main reason for her not investing in friends, or even herself, has always been the kids. Like I mentioned earlier in this post, 90% of the answers have to relate to the kids to some degree. At this point in our session, I started to feel like there was a common denominator: the kids, in most of the frustrations and problems she was experiencing. So I simply asked her, "Do you think you may be upset at me because I'm responsible for these kids? In the sense that I got you pregnant so young?" I wasn't ready. But she said that she was upset at me for that. She also followed up with the fact that she knows that's unreasonable because it takes two to tango. I did feel like it was progress because it kind of gave us something to work on and help alleviate some of these burdens. So we agreed to invest more time in nurturing good friendships, both together and individually. Towards the end of the session, we began to discuss what actionable items we would take from this session. At this point, it was still all very ambiguous and blurry as to what the outcomes were. I was very direct and very forward in asking my wife what her plan is moving forward. Note: I had decided prior to the session that should my wife say the same thing about being a co-parenting roommate, that I would take the 180 approach and essentially do me. She started basically saying the same thing, that she doesn't have any desire to be intimate or sexual with me as of now, and that she loves me immensely, and she feels bad for not being there for me. As mentioned in my first post, I also brought up the brief swinging that happened, too, for the 50th time, said it wasn't a problem. I agree with her on this. This was something that was a mechanical approach for a solution to a problem that was very much in existence when we tried this. We both really have no issue with this. We know it happened. We tried it, and mutually stopped and turned the page. I also brought up other life events that may cause resentment, and really, we ended up not getting anywhere else as far as the root for resentment, which was discouraging. I then basically expressed to my wife that I will not be okay with that arrangement. I told her that I've really done everything I can, and that this issue really has reached a point where it has nothing to do with me or requires me to do anything that I'm currently not doing. I was very direct and said that I will not be accepting this dynamic and that I need to be with someone who is actively involved in our marriage, works towards resolutions, and is very much interested in maintaining an active intimacy and sexual relationship. I expressed how I'm not going to be a convenience, and that there was more to life than being roommates and co-parents. I made sure she knows I love her dearly and that I do want this to work for the better. I also told her that I'm fully committed to this marriage so long as she is as well, and that if she wasn't, it's okay. However, I will not be a part of something where these efforts are not reciprocated. I told her I have no plans of leaving, and I do not want a divorce. However, I made it clear that if this dynamic continues, that divorce will be the only outcome. Of course, tears were involved, and it was a very bleak and sad ending to the session. Still, nothing was said, and I walked out very discouraged and very determined to start working on the 180 as soon as we left the room. It's painful and very difficult because much of the 180 requires you to be very short and cold and transactional. The saddest part is realizing this dynamic already is very cold and transactional. Here is where it gets very interesting. I started working on implementing many of the 180 recommendations that same day. I mentioned to my wife that, hey, things are going to be a bit different moving forward. I'm going to honor her roommate co-parent dynamic without reproach, and that it should be no mistake that I'm not happy here. And I am never going to be okay with it, but I am done working on it if she wasn't going to work on it. She agreed and went to bed. I started to build distance, and started to basically focus on myself. Very short and transactional. She asked for help on some of her personal things, to which I declined, and it really shocked her. She was upset, saying I was being petulant. I explained to her that she is now fully in charge of her own life and her own issues. We didn't talk all day, and we only spoke when necessary. A few days. I keep this going, and she's very visibly upset and stressed. I typically react to that with gestures of help or nurturing, but I didn't this time. That night, she was crying, telling me she's stressed and she thinks something is wrong with me because I'm indifferent. I simply listened. Then I told her that this is the dynamic she proposed and that I'm simply, much like her, taking care of myself and focusing on myself. I'm not going to lie, it has been very hard to be cold and distant because, as I mentioned before, I love her and I wish I could hold her and love on her. However, I know this is somewhat manipulative in a way, just to get her way and still keep me in the friend zone. So I've been staying the course. We're now going on a week of this 180, and let's just say there has been many changes on her side. I think she is starting to realize there is more to me than just friends and co-parenting. I sent her a text a few days ago, essentially itemizing bills and separating the financial responsibilities 50-50s, and she lost her mind. She basically told me it was out of left field, to which I responded, hey, friends go in 50-50s, and as your friend, I expect nothing less. This was very eye-opening because it gave me a glimpse of how I'm really taken for granted and how her level of comfort and convenience at my expense is really overlooked. I pushed through anyway and basically told her that this is the new dynamic she asked for, and that it's still a bargain because she would have to be 100% if she was on her own. I'll wrap up with this. While the 180 has been working in many different areas, I am still very much sad about the overall situation. There have been many eye-opening statements being said and realizations that have not been pleasant to encounter. It has also sparked new energy and new efforts on her side as well. She's definitely seeking to talk to me more often, and while it's hard to turn down, I hope if things improve, this continues to happen. I've also noticed that she's making more time for herself aside from being a mom, which is huge because she pretty much neglected herself for years. I'm very pleased seeing her be more herself. My hope is that as we work on ourselves, the marriage improves. There really is no telling at this point where this will go. We are very much cordial and amicable even to this day, and that's a very good sign. Boundaries are set and expectations are very clear, and I feel that no matter the outcome, I will be at peace with everything that has been done. We're still going to continue the couples therapist until we either rekindle our marriage or end up in divorce. I feel like having this unbiased third party really helps as a witness and as a guide through this. No matter what, I will always love my wife. However, I will not participate in a sexless, intimacy-less marriage because we both deserve better. Thank you all for all the kind words and recommendations and feedback. This will be my last post on this topic, and I wish you all the best. Best TLDR, my wife friend-zoned me once to just co-parent at my expense, but I started the 180 method to try and find a solution because she doesn't want to work on us, which seems to be working on getting her out of her rut and helping me discover more about how she feels. Also, therapy is paramount and highly recommended to all couples. Relevant comments. Comment 1. So I'm going to assume that your wife has a lucrative job and you are both going 50-50s on childcare as you both work and share children. Because otherwise this approach is just plain financially abusive. And if you're planning on saying I won't pay the bills unless you have sex with me, sexually abusive as well. Assuming that is the case and you aren't a total POS, I'm actually interested in how this works out for you. I feel like I'm in an unstated similar situation. We both work and have blended finances. But we don't go to bed together or eat together, have barely any intimacy, a kiss or two, hugs every couple days, and spend maybe 8 hours a week together, just the three of us, him, me, and the toddler, even less just the two of us, maybe 3 hours a week. Otherwise, he is on his game, or out playing sports, watching YouTube, or whatever else he does. It barely feels like a friend situation, let alone a marriage. I'm curious how she handles it as the spouse that presumably was pulling away first. I hope you keep us updated. OP, yes. We both have degrees, good careers, and while I make significantly more money, her salary is very proficient and above average. The 50-50s was not to nor hurt her financially, that is cruel, but mostly to send a message on what a roommate dynamic looks like in the real world. I really dislike how people immediately jump to conclusions about the finances as a way of manipulating her. It's not the case at all. Plenty of money left over after bills. However, 50-50s means she has less leftover money and the understanding that roommates share everything equally. Prior to this 180 approach, we did everything together and with our kids. We always saw ourselves as a unit that does things together, both alone and with the kids too. That's changed now, where I'm choosing to focus on more independent types of pastimes and focus. That is what has sparked her reaction and realization of there's more than just roommates here. Comment 2. How does one dump half of the household expenses on the other person if they share a bank account? Or are your finances kept separately? Just curious how this would work if applied to my life. Excellent question. We shared everything. The proposed 50/50s was suggesting we place the necessary amount to pay bills in the same account, and any leftover money can be deposited to a new account. I think this is why she was very upset. She felt a huge loss of control knowing she won't be able to monitor my finances. Also, she felt a huge loss in her leftover money with this arrangement, and saw that I would keep significantly more of my own. This is still being worked out because I think she is calling my bluff here. But my plan is to notify her next week as I modify my direct deposit and open a new account. It will definitely be more real there. To be clear for all the trolls here, yes, she will have less leftover money after responsibilities, and it's still enough to live on. Example, for reference, assume I make $3,000 a month, she makes $1,000 a month, responsibilities are $1,000 a month, so she'd contribute $500 and I would contribute $500, where before she would contribute only $250. This is the last comment I'll add regarding money and finances. She's fine and she's not hurting, I promise. When asked, what if she leaves for another man? Interesting, she has no shortage of men hitting on her, and we by no means are jealous people. So I've witnessed this multiple times and her reactions are somewhat indifferent. I will say, if another man for her was the answer, she'd tell me, or she'd have some inkling. Maybe there's no telling, but I think the problem is deeper than superficial attention from a different person. You might be right, and if this is the case, so be it. However, I'll live with peace knowing I left no stone left unturned. I know I would be disappointed and saddened if she did leave for another man that would accept the bare minimum. But I'd also feel at peace knowing it's not all my fault. I know I'm responsible in some way, to some degree. That's just marriage. I know sadness and depression will creep, but we'll both overcome. But if this does happen, at least there will be clear reasons and clarity as to why it did. Also, I know for a fact that she wouldn't cheat. We're both very blunt, open, and transparent. She would definitely tell me that she wants to step out on our marriage before it happens, as would I. We owe ourselves this respect for each other, and we actively practice it. New update. I debated for a long time on whether to submit an update on this matter. A few significant changes have taken place, and I felt it would be good to not only share with you but also to allow myself to process all of this in a uniform way. We're now almost 9 weeks in on the 180 method I mentioned I was starting, and it started to render some positive reactions for my wife. I explained in the previous post that she started to notice things that she previously took for granted, started to ask more about my whereabouts, and also started to notice I would go out with the kids more often without her. She started to invite herself, to which I didn't decline. So much has changed. And it has changed for what seems to be for the better. This past Memorial Day weekend, my wife asked me if I wanted to go out for coffee because she wanted to talk to me about something. This was huge because I can't recall the last time my wife asked to talk to me about something important. I must admit, I was very nervous and worried about what this could be about. And my mind was racing with the plethora of scenarios of what it could possibly be. Of course, I agreed, and we took some time away from the kids to have this conversation at a local coffee shop. The talk was very constructive in nature. There was a ton of insightful information about herself that helped me further understand where she is in life, both emotionally and mentally. We summarized what the core issues we are encountering are, and she asked me for help. This is new, and I cannot tell you how excited I was to hear something so sincere coming from my wife, who for the last 2+ years has been absent. So, after she was sharing all her thoughts, I proposed a plan that I felt was right for us. This is something that I had been thinking about these last few weeks, and I was planning on bringing this up in a few months if I noticed that things were not changing for the better. This date felt like the right place to share it since it goes hand in hand with what she talked about, and it also relates to the help she was asking me for. I started by first acknowledging her feelings and her concerns. I told her they are valid, and how she feels is personal to her, and that I care that she feels this way because I don't like the thought of her being sad or depressed. I also told her that my goal still is and will always be for us to reconcile and be the happily ever after we vowed to be for each other, and that my love for her is as strong, if not stronger, as it was the day we said I do. I continued the conversation by telling her how I felt about the whole situation. Read my previous post for details and how it affects me every day. I also clarified some things that she mentioned she was feeling because I've been very distant and monotone, transactional lately. I explained to her that I was very much trying to protect my feelings and emotions from the rejection and neglect, and that it wasn't personal. It was simply me safeguarding myself because I cannot control her. I can only control myself. This was a perfect segue to the core of this approach, which is focused on self-accountability. I told her that for the longest time, I was always working hard to make her happy and do things that I knew she enjoyed or wanted. However, I was always met with rejection and disappointment, which caused a load of stress on me. I explained to her that I had to make a change for myself. After all, I can only control myself and make the changes that I want for myself. I mentioned how I was starting to implement new habits and routines that helped edify me, all while still executing all of our shared responsibilities, including parenting, finances, and daily living activities. I explained that the goal is to continue to improve myself, both as a husband and father, learn more, and be healthier, among other things. She was very receptive to this. She told me that she sees what I'm doing and that she is proud of the changes she has seen. She also told me how she's starting to realize that she feels left behind, and that much of the things that have affected her negatively are her own fault. Toward the end of the conversation, which was about 3 hours, there was a very high spirit of reconciliation in the room. I told her that my goal is to ultimately make this work. However, I was very clear that I was not going to live under the current circumstances. I told her that my heart wants her to be happy, even if it means elsewhere, and that I also deserve to be happy myself. I also explained that I do not want our children to grow up thinking this was okay, or normal, because they deserve better as well. She told me she doesn't either. She told me she doesn't know what to do, to which I replied, let's set some clear goals. However, the goals will be for ourselves, not for each other. So here is what we established. We are in charge of our own happiness. The key here is that she's not responsible for making me happy, and vice versa. We both need to seek what that personal plan looks like individually. Also, we're both encouraged to include each other in taking those steps if we want, but it is not required. We are in control of our own individual lives and our own journey. This means we're both responsible for finding the resources necessary to grow, change, and heal. We can definitely help one another when help is requested, however. Unsolicited advice or help will not be rendered. We are responsible for communicating. This ensures nothing is left unsaid. If it was never brought up or discussed, it never happened. We're not mind readers, and we need to take ownership when we fail to communicate. Make a list of needs and wants. This gives us both clear directions about meeting each other's needs. This also gives us a choice as to what we want, choose to do, compromise on, or decline to do. This list also will not serve as a checklist for accountability. We made it clear we would not be bringing this list up for the purpose of arguing, and it was up to the other person to use the list as a tool for growth, transparency, or clarification. We concluded that it was up to us to decide if we will be happy doing these things for ourselves because we care, not to simply check a box. This was very important in order to establish long-term habits, and not short-term band-aids, because you cannot make someone change or do something they don't believe is important. We established a deadline, Memorial Day 2025. At the end of the conversation, we concluded by setting Memorial Day 2025 as a hard stop to evaluate our lives and our progress. We agreed we would do this with the clear understanding that we will independently decide if we're happy here. If we determine we aren't happy, we will be getting a divorce. We would also both assume full responsibility for what happened should we get divorced. For example, if needs were not met, it would mean my partner chose not to meet them. This places full responsibility on each other in all areas. The whole process requires that if needs were not met, the next question should be, did we do everything to address this issue? If yes, then we will have a clear conscience of what transpired and know we left no stone unturned. If, however, we didn't do everything to address the issue, it will mean the issue was not important enough for you or you didn't care to meet those needs. This goes both ways in all areas. Like everything else. We established that the main motivator for change should be ourselves, and that if we did that, we would in turn begin to see beneficial changes towards each other. The goal is to ensure that everything we are doing for one another to meet each other's needs is being done because we want to do it for our spouse, not because she asked. Instead, it was done because I know it makes him or her happy, and I love seeing them happy. I felt it was important to mention to her that we are no longer required to do anything for each other. It is now more of a, I want to do these things for each other. Ultimately, I felt the conversation was very positive and productive. Many tears were shed, and lots of hugging ensued. I know this doesn't mean or guarantee anything, however, this has never happened before, and I can honestly attribute it to the 180 method. I cannot give any more insight on this method other than it's the only thing I did differently, and something new happened for what seems to be better. I've decided I will conclude and will refrain from this method moving forward, as the plan now has changed. I'm planning to devote myself entirely to not only myself and my growth, but also to work on her needs and wants, because I want her to be happy by my side. She said and agreed she would do the same for herself. We agreed we would help and build each other wherever we request for it, and that we will be approaching this as a team. As of today, some of the biggest changes I have noticed are her commitment to therapy and mental health. She is taking some antidepressants that are helping her. She is also more confident, and in a far better mood more frequently. We have started to explore more ways of intimacy in multiple areas, such as physical touch and words of affirmation. Sex is starting to make an appearance, which is exciting. Side note, sex was very, very awkward to start when you've been abstinent for so long. We've also started to work out together, which is great, and have lost weight, which is also very exciting. Overall, communication has improved, and I cannot wait to see where this leads. I hope this helps someone out there. I'm still very much interested in your feedback and thoughts on this. You all have been a huge help in giving me hope and insight into this tough journey. Trolls aside, many of you have really been instrumental in my journey, both emotionally and mentally. I will not be providing any more updates until Memorial Day next year. I think it's now time to keep focusing on myself and start working on all the new opportunities that hopefully will arise with my wife. I wish you all the best in life and your relationships with those you love. TLDR, our marriage took a turn for the better after the 180 method, and we're now working on ourselves, each other, and rekindling our marriage. We also set a deadline for next year to either remain together or get divorced. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. Tricked into buying a house for my sister, I finally stopped being the family ATM and took back control of my life. This story has been consuming me for the past few months, and I, 32M, need to tell it. It tells the story of how my parents tricked me into purchasing a home for them, then gave it to my younger sister, Perry, 29F, and what transpired when I finally had enough. Be advised that this is a lengthy and intricate tale of financial exploitation, family deception, and ultimately defending oneself. My family had to constantly balance their finances when I was growing up. Even though we weren't impoverished, there was always a tension that was related to money. You could call my dad, 58M, a serial entrepreneur, but none of his business endeavors ever truly took off. He constantly pursued the next great chance, jumping from job to job. He would be selling life insurance one month, certain that he would succeed in the field, and then attempting to launch a home remodeling company the next, despite his lack of experience. Every new endeavor had the same cycle: initial enthusiasm, mounting annoyance, and unavoidable failure. The perpetual optimist, Mom, 55F, consistently supported Dad's decisions. She would say to us over dinner, "Your father is a visionary," just after he had left another secure career to take a chance on a dangerous project. "He only needs one significant break to keep us afloat." She took on part-time jobs, but her true job was to keep up this facade of normalcy, while our financial circumstances were anything but. My sister Perry and I had a very different dynamic. I was chosen at a young age to be the family's savior and their key to a brighter future. I used this lens to examine every choice I made. I recall wanting to join the school band when I was 14 years old. My parents sat me down for a serious conversation about how the computer club would appear better on college applications, rather than encouraging my passion in music. My parents, who somehow always found money we purportedly didn't have, paid for Perry's art classes one month and her dance lessons the next, allowing her to follow whatever whimsy interests she had. In high school, the pressure increased significantly. I kept my GPA at 4.0 because it was considered bad, not because I was inherently smart. You would think I had committed a heinous sin after I received an A in AP Physics one semester. 4 days. My father would only talk to me when he made scathing remarks about how mediocrity isn't an option for someone who needs to support their family. Teenagers need to express themselves, Mom said dismissively, when Perry skipped 3 days of school that week to spend time with her pals. Perry was finding herself. And I spent my high school years in this pressure cooker of expectations. I was supposed to create a thorough financial success strategy. Perry would easily go in beyond curfew without any repercussions, whereas I would study until 2 o'clock in the morning while fueled by energy drinks and anxiousness. It was a sharp contrast. "The traditional education system just doesn't suit her learning style," was the response given to Perry's run of D's and F's. While my B+ in calculus prompted a family conference regarding my declining standards, my parents made it apparent that my only choice when it came time for college was tech school. Not because it fit with my hobbies, they never inquired about those, but rather because it provided the quickest path to a well-paying career. At every stage, they made sure I realized the extent of their sacrifice by taking out loans and spending down what little savings they had. Mom used to say, "Or eating ramen so you can have a future." But oddly, there was always money for Perry's newest pastime or adventure. Tech school was harsh due to the continual pressure from home as well as the challenging homework. I lived on the cheapest possible diet, worked part-time at a computer repair business in between classes, and was constantly reminded of my parents' investment in me. Every phone conversation featured an update on their financial difficulties, as well as overt clues about when I might be able to reimburse them. Perry, meanwhile, left high school during her last year. In fact, my parents applauded her choice, rather than the drama I would have experienced. "Not everyone is cut out for school," they stated. "She is courageous for pursuing her own goals." She spent the following years exploring her options, which included working as a barista, store clerk, dog walker, and yoga instructor trainee, all of which were part-time positions that lasted no longer than a few months until she eventually quit because it wasn't fulfilling her soul. Every new job she took was hailed as her genuine calling. I was hired by a burgeoning tech startup after I graduated from computer school. Although the pay wasn't particularly noteworthy by industry standards, it was more than my family had ever received. I recall phoning my parents to break the news, hoping for a single unadulterated moment of joy. Rather, Dad started figuring out how much I could give them per month right away. And Mom started making a list of all the bills they needed assistance with to save money. I moved into a small apartment with 2 roommates. Although it wasn't ideal, I was earning enough money to buy a home of my own. I felt compelled to live simply in order to support my parents. I tried to balance their needs with my student loan payments and other living expenditures by sending them money each month. However, it was never sufficient. Dad would call with a remorseful speech about how they had given up everything for my schooling. If I didn't send an extra month, my work became my haven. I poured myself into projects, gained a reputation for solving challenging issues, and began to advance in the company. Every bonus or promotion ought to have been a triumph, but instead, they served as further sources of pressure. "So you'll be able to help us more now, right?" was the constant inquiry, rather than, "Are you proud of yourself?" or, "What are your goals?" Perry's pattern of irregular employment and snap judgments persisted. When things went apart, she would return home after living with friends. She would enroll in online classes but stop midway through. Our parents were understanding and supportive of every setback, despite the fact that she was well into her 20s. They would exclaim, "She's still young, she simply hasn't discovered her calling yet." What I assumed would be a typical Sunday meal at their rental apartment was actually the pivotal moment. Although I had been picking up on more clues than usual regarding their financial difficulties, I wasn't ready for what happened next. After all these years of investing in the family's future, Dad began to talk about how tired they were of renting, how their landlord was raising the rent once more, and how they needed a place of their own. The directness still took me by surprise, even though I understood where this was going. "Honey, we've been thinking," Mom replied, reaching across the table and taking my hand. "We've given up so much for you to reach this point. And you're doing fantastically now. Do you not think it's time to assist us in purchasing a home?" They let go of years' worth of pent-up guilt when I revealed that I was struggling to pay my own rent and save for the future. Dad talked about how they could have invested in me rather than saving for retirement. Mom sobbed as she talked about how all they wanted in their last years was stability. Perry, who was residing with them at the time, said that I was living comfortably while our parents were having financial difficulties. Months passed during the pressure campaign. They casually mentioned places they had seen in every phone conversation. Dad would share tales of their friends' kids who had done right by their parents by purchasing properties, while Mom would email ads just to look at. Perry even got involved, writing to me to say that after everything our parents had done for me, they deserved this one thing. Despite my best efforts, I was susceptible to their manipulation due to decades of indoctrination. The guilt became too much. Their age, their sacrifices, and their need for stability would keep me up at night. Though years of familial dynamics are difficult to overcome, my therapist, yes, I did finally start seeing one, warned me about setting limits. I finally gave in after months of psychological combat. I persuaded myself that this was the proper thing to do, even though I had saved up a respectable sum for a down payment, money that ought to have gone toward my own future. The guilt trips would end once they had a home. I promised myself, at last, they would be content, and I could begin to concentrate on my own life. I purchased a basic 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing extravagant. The monthly payments were difficult, but I reasoned that if I kept up my thrifty lifestyle and lived with roommates, I could manage. Everything appeared to be going well for the first several months. My parents were ecstatic, telling friends and relatives how well their son had done them in showing off their home. However, the requests increased rather than decreased. They wanted to landscape the backyard because the neighbors would judge us, and they required new furniture because the old stuff doesn't seem right in this magnificent house. Every request was accompanied by the same old guilt trip. "After everything we've done for you." I continued to pay my mortgage, sending more when I could in an effort to pay it off sooner. I convinced myself that it was worthwhile to provide my parents with the security they had never had even if I was still living with roommates, and putting my own life on hold. They began discussing how nice it would be for Perry to have a secure location close by, and they made casual references to how she was assisting them in settling in. But I chose to ignore the warning flags. In hindsight, I ought to have anticipated this. I was so used to prioritizing their demands that I failed to notice all the warning signs. The events that followed compelled me to face the ugly truth of my family's relationships and make one of the most difficult choices of my life. Update 1. I'll tell you what transpired when I paid a surprise visit to the house I purchased. I wish I could say I was shocked by what I discovered, but perhaps I had a sneaking suspicion this kind of stuff was coming. It all began one weekend when I attempted to phone my folks to talk about the additional mortgage payments I had been making. They never missed an opportunity to discuss money, so it was strange that neither of them answered. I made multiple efforts before deciding to drive to the residence. Everything changed because of what I discovered there. Wearing pajamas as if she owned the home, Perry answered the door. She didn't say, "Hey, nice to see you," or even, "What's brought you here?" Rather, she asked, "Oh, what are you doing here?" with an irritated expression, as though I were breaking her schedule. As I stood there, I tried to take in everything I was seeing. I felt sick to my stomach when I entered. The entire house had been converted into Perry's private area. Her personal portraits had taken the place of our family photos on the walls. Her clothes were draped over the furniture, and her art supplies were strewn all over the table that had once been our parents' dining room table. She was allegedly now a budding social media personality, and the spare room had been transformed into some sort of creative studio for her latest business endeavor. "Where's Dad and Mom?" I was able to inquire while attempting to remain calm. She answered nonchalantly, as though everyone knew. "Oh, they moved out a few weeks ago, across town. They discovered a pleasant rental." "Did they not inform you?" "Certainly, they hadn't informed me. No one had considered mentioning that Perry had moved in and my parents had left." Even though I had been making extra mortgage payments on this place, I felt like I was physically struck by the betrayal. I contacted my folks while seated on the couch, which was now adorned with Perry's throw cushions. This time, Mom responded, and her justification infuriated me. "We planned to inform you, honey. We believe this would be the ideal setting for Perry, who required a steady setting to concentrate on her career. You're doing great, and she needs time to figure out what she wants to do." Mom's voice took on that recognizable guilt-tripping tone when I brought up the fact that I was the one making the mortgage payments. "Can't you help your sister? After all, we've given up for you. Your additional payments will be used to cover our new rent. Everything remains within the family." I lost it at that point. Remains within family? I didn't buy this house to give Perry a free crash pad. I bought it for you and Dad, and without notifying me, you're paying your rent with my extra mortgage payments in an attempt to manipulate me. Mom broke down in tears and said that I was being self-centered and that family members should support one another. After I obtained my IT job, Dad got on the phone and started lecturing me about how I'd changed and gotten materialistic. The actual kicker, the majority of their furniture had already been transferred into their new rental, leaving Perry with the more recent pieces I had assisted them in purchasing for the property. I was the one who was really footing the bill, and they had planned this entire event without ever contacting me. "I'm focusing on building my brand right now," Perry responded with a shrug when I questioned her about her involvement in the mortgage. She replied, "I'll be able to help out once I get my social media following up." As she opened a new ring light that she was probably buying with the additional cash I'd been giving for the mortgage, I alternated between anger and incredulity during the drive home. The Family First lectures, guilt trips, and years of manipulation were all meant to keep me footing the bill while I put my own life on hold. I'd been allowing myself a few days to calm down and gather my thoughts before deciding what to do next. A part of me wants to halt all payments right away and let them face the repercussions. Fighting against years of training and worrying about being the bad son who left his family is another aspect. However, one thing is certain, this cannot go on. I have had enough of being the family ATM. This weekend, I've planned a meeting with my parents to establish some clear guidelines. Perry must either start making a sizable mortgage payment, or something will need to change. I'll provide another report following the meeting, but I already have a feeling it won't be pleasant. My parents are skilled manipulators of emotions, and I have no doubt that they are already preparing their case. But for the first time in my life, I'm prepared to defend my position, even if it means playing the antagonist in their tale. I'm aware of the irony. My sister lives rent-free in a home I pay for, but I continue to share a room with her. I sometimes question how I allowed things to get to this point. But I suppose that's what happens when you're subjected to manipulation and guilt from your family for years. Update 2. Things didn't go as planned when I confronted my folks. In fact, it went worse than I had anticipated. Allow me to describe what transpired during one of the most tense family gatherings I have ever experienced. When I got to their new rental apartment, I found that it was considerably more costly than their old one. I saw a big TV and some new furniture. As soon as I came in, I could now pinpoint the precise source of my additional mortgage payments. They had purposefully scheduled this meeting for a family meal, presumably in the hopes that I wouldn't object when food was involved. In hindsight, I should have anticipated that they would work against me, but Perry was also present, which was not in my original plan. They started their plan before I could even begin to talk about the house problem. My favorite childhood supper was made by Mom, Emotional Manipulation 101, and Dad began displaying old pictures of me while discussing simpler times when family meant everything. I made an effort to direct the discussion toward the real problem. We must discuss Perry's living situation in the house. The mood changed at once. Mom set her fork down, Dad's expression tightened. Her phone suddenly peaked, and Perry's curiosity observed. I began. I purchased that home for you and your father. Now that you've moved out and given it to Perry, you're paying your rent with my extra money. I wasn't told about any of this, and that needs to change. Dad went on the attack right away. You're keeping score now, then. Following all that we have done for you. He produced a notebook, a real notebook, in which he had recorded all of the costs they had ever expended for my schooling. Should we discuss our expenses for your tech school? What did we give up? Mom, who can cry on command, I promise, adopted a different tact, tears already welling up. Mom added tearfully, we thought you'd understand. Perry is having a hard time figuring out her path, and we just want both of our children to succeed. Isn't that what family does, support each other? I'm actually working really hard on my social media presence. I've gained 200 followers this month. The house gives me the perfect backdrop for my content. My lifestyle influencer career is about to take off, Perry said eventually, looking up from her phone to share her viewpoint. Perry, you're living rent-free in a house I'm paying for, while I'm still sharing an apartment with roommates. How is that fair? I was hearing and I couldn't believe it. Not everything is about money. You're so privileged with your tech job. You don't understand how hard it is for creative people like me, she said, rolling her eyes. Then they delivered another bombshell. Mom hesitantly said they had already gotten quotations for the makeover and told Perry she could turn the garage into a content creation studio, expecting me to pay for it, of course. This stops now. Either Perry starts paying her fair share of the mortgage, or we need to figure out a different arrangement. I lost it at that moment. We put you through school. We sacrificed everything for your success, and now you're going to deny your sister the same chance? Said Dad, slamming his hand on the table. The same chance? I chuckled sourly. This isn't about chances, it's about responsibility. Perry left high school and has never worked for more than 3 months. How can you be so cruel? We raised you better than this. Perry needs stability to pursue her dreams, Mom said, her tears growing more intense. I yelled back, what about my dreams? I've sacrificed everything for this family, including my own dreams. Living with roommates, saving for the future, and paying for a house I can't even live in. From there, the debate got more heated as Dad began to enumerate all the sacrifices they had ever made for me. Mom continued to sob about her commitment to the family. And Perry accused me of being envious of her imminent success. Starting next month, I'm only paying the basic mortgage, no extras. I finally made my ultimatum. If Perry wants to stay in the house, she needs to contribute. If not, we need to sell it. Mom complained that I was ruining the family. Dad branded me materialistic and ungrateful, and Perry stormed out, accusing me of ruining her career before it had even begun. You would think that I had suggested setting fire to an orphanage. On the journey home, I began to reflect on all the years I had spent trying to please them all, the sacrifices I'd made, all the guilt I'd carried, and for the first time, I realized how manipulative they were. I left that night feeling both exhausted and oddly free. Dad sent multiple angry texts about my betrayal. Perry has posted ambiguous social media updates about toxic family members and dealing with haters. Mom has been calling nonstop and leaving heartfelt voicemails about how they can't afford their rent without my help. And I've already contacted the bank to stop the extra payments. I've been the family ATM for too long, putting everyone else's demands before my own. But I'm not giving up this time. If they can't see that, perhaps more serious measures are in order. For the first time in my life, I'm willing to put myself first, even if it means becoming the antagonist in their story. But I have a sense that this isn't quite over yet. Update 3. Let me tell you how everything finally fell apart, and where I am now. Following that final encounter, I took the most difficult decision of my life. I stopped making mortgage payments altogether. My phone exploded in the first week after I stopped making payments. I received 47 calls from Mom, 23 from Dad, and even messages from Perry on every social media site imaginable. I blocked them all. But they got creative, using friends' phones, making new accounts on social media, and even reaching out to relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. "I can't sleep knowing my son has abandoned us," was the first guilt-tripping statement in Mom's voicemails. "We'll lose everything because of you," was the next desperate statement. In his more combative communications, Dad said, "No son of mine would do this to his family." Of particular relevance was Perry's campaign against me on social media. She began sharing stories of toxic family members that ruin your dreams on a regular basis. The surreal part was when I looked at Perry's Instagram and noticed that she was charging $50 per session for her insights into the influencer lifestyle, while holding creativity classes in the property I was paying for. She used my financial crisis as engagement material for her fans and turned the living room into a content-producing space. The bank sent out their first notice around week 3. My parents sent it to me with a single message. "Is this what you want, to see your family homeless?" I archived the email without answering. The flying monkeys then appeared. I received calls from family friends I hadn't spoken to in years, expressing their disappointment with my decisions. I was ruining my parents' golden years. According to a long correspondence from my aunt, my former high school instructor even expressed concern about my recent changes in lifestyle on Facebook. None of them were aware that I had finally begun therapy and was recovering from years of emotional and financial abuse. My therapist assisted me in realizing that my family had established a situation in which I was always in charge of everyone's welfare except for my own. Perry's Rise Above Surviving Family Betrayal podcast, which was taped in a house I purchased, was the true turning point. The first episode focused on her affluent tech bro brother's jealous attempts to crush her goals. In fact, she was able to garner a modest following from those who understood her plight. The bank's notices grew more serious after the second month. My parents changed strategies and sent me pictures of homes they were considering, all of which were far less expensive than the rental they were renting at the time. Mom texted from a different number. "See, we're trying to compromise." However, I saw that Perry had not yet been asked to help or find a space of her own. Perry hosted a farewell to my dream space broadcast, complete with theatrical monologues about overcoming adversity in response to the approaching foreclosure, for her emergency relocation fund. She even created a GoFundMe page, carefully omitting the fact that she had never made any payments on the residence. Finding out that Perry had been renting out one of the rooms to another content provider, and keeping the money for herself was the last straw. This came after Mom had called me in tears, explaining that they were unable to make any mortgage contributions. Perry had to quickly relocate her content development business back to our parents' rental. When the bank eventually gained ownership of the house, she took care to record everything for her fans, portraying herself as a victim of uncontrollable events. I found it ironic that she never mentioned the true source of the house's funding. Dad gave me a final call, which I did answer. His voice was low, almost defeated, rather than the rage I had anticipated. He remarked, "We really thought you'd cave. We never thought you'd actually let the house go." I learned all I needed to know about their perception of me from that admission. They saw me not as a son, but as a steady source of revenue that they could control whenever they wanted. The fallout has been easier and harder than I anticipated, more difficult since there is a gap when you break off communication with your entire family, no matter how toxic they may be. It's easier since I'm solely accountable to myself. For the first time in my adult life, I currently live in my own apartment. Though small, it belongs to me. Every choice I make is for my own future, not to satisfy the needs or desires of others. I'm finally considering purchasing a home for myself, this time just for me. As my savings account continues to increase, the family still makes an effort to get in touch now and again. Mom sends guilt-ridden, subtly accusatory holiday cards. Articles regarding unappreciative kids are emailed by Dad. Based on the drama in our family, Perry has reportedly remade herself as a trauma healing counselor. However, I'm finished. The sale of the house was about more than simply real estate. It was about escaping a lifetime of shame and exploitation. I finally come to terms with the fact that sometimes establishing limits means playing the bad guy in someone else's tale. It's never too late to quit burning yourself alive to keep others warm. If you're in a similar circumstance, the manipulation is more difficult than the guilt, but it's your life to live. Avoid waiting as long as I did to come to that realization. I want to thank everyone for their warm reactions and tremendous support. I learned from reading your comments that I'm not the only one who has to deal with financial exploitation in the family. I was strengthened by the accounts of so many of you who had gone through similar things. This community has been really encouraging and reassuring. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.